Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to speak in support of the liquor legislation amendment repeal of the minimum floor pricing bill. And Madam Speaker, one date that's etched in my mind very clearly is July 17, 2022. For those that don't know in this parliament, Madam Speaker, that was the date in which the Stronger Futures legislation ceased in the Northern Territory and my hometown of Alice Springs was unimaginably impacted by alcohol. I find it extremely hypocritical, extremely, that the leader of the opposition would walk in here and speak about things that were proven to have worked after she was a part of a government that saw the Stronger Futures legislation cease. We were in this parliament. New legislation was put into its place.
Order. Order. Come on.
And we faced in Alice Springs crime and domestic violence-related incidents like we'd never seen before as a result of the former Labor government. It was absolutely shocking, Madam Speaker. It was absolutely shocking, Madam Speaker, and it was absolutely ignorant of the former government to do that.
Okay, let's restore some order in the room.
Grog ran rampant. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Stores had 300% increases in sales. There were health experts there too, Madam Speaker. They were speaking to the government of the day. They were telling them not to go ahead with what they were about to do, but they chose not to listen, Madam Speaker. One thing that I would like to speak very clearly to about today is why the repeal of this legislation is the right thing to do. Because if this legislation was working, when we saw the Stronger Futures legislation repealed, when we saw it cease, there would have been no harm in our community. This floor price would have saved us all, Madam Speaker. That is not what happened. The floor price did absolutely nothing to protect my hometown of Alice Springs. Nothing to protect the 179 incidents of domestic violence-related call-outs that police responded to in the first week after those restrictions ceased. What we are doing today is ensuring that we are amending this legislation. We know that we have the right settings in place. The police, we are continuing to resource police with additional resources so that they can be at the ready. But, Madam Speaker, we are ensuring that we do have the settings right as we go into the future. Pallies, Madam Speaker, are a huge part of that. What we've seen previously under the former Labor government was that pallies were not prioritised. In my community of Alice Springs, I want to be very clear once again as it relates to alcohol policy. There are these things called restricted areas. They relate to the former Stronger Futures legislation. And if you visit Alice Springs from a restricted area and try to purchase alcohol, a police officer, a pally, will ask you where you'll be drinking that alcohol. If you cannot prove that you have an address that you can legally go and consume that alcohol, you will be refused service. These pallies are the single most effective policy that we have seen in my hometown of Alice Springs for years. And what we saw with the ceasing of the Stronger Futures was essentially their role became null and void, because that was the role. The only way in which we could ensure that the restricted locations across the Northern Territory, these restricted areas, were actually enforced was by having a police officer there, checking that person's identification, knowing the communities where they weren't allowed to consume alcohol and restricted areas, whether they be tag camps or other living spaces, and refusing access to that alcohol. By not prioritising pallies, by removing the Stronger Futures legislation, we saw an absolute avalanche of alcohol throughout our community. Alcohol sales went up by 300%. DV went through the roof. We had property offences, Madam Speaker, going up through the roof. We had one of our own health experts, 𝙼𝙾𝙼𝙻𝙼, who spoke on radio at the time about the impacts that it had had to her when her home had been broken into and the people had allegedly yelled at her for alcohol. This is what we experienced when that happened, when alcohol policy was dictated to by the former Labor government. This culminated, Madam Speaker, in a visit from the Prime Minister of Australia in January of 2023. He told the then Chief Minister, Natasha Fyles, that they needed to put back in place these restrictions so that alcohol was not readily available to those that unfortunately were abusing it and that then were harming others, very vulnerable people in our community. It impacted our community more than any other, and we lived through this. We lived through this absolute crime wave, domestic violence, and it went on for 6 months. Let's remember that date, because I'll never forget it. July 17, 2022. And the Prime Minister of Australia had to fly into Alice Springs 6 months later in January to essentially ensure that the restrictions that were in place prior were brought back in and peace and justice was restored somewhat, I say, because Alice Springs has borne the brunt of that reputational damage ever since. And that's why I stand here today so convinced that this liquor legislation amendment bill will not impact my community. Because it was still in place when the Stronger Future ceased. And the fact that alcohol was limited by $1.30 per standard drink didn't stop people from accessing it. We've heard stories, Madam Speaker, in remote communities, people paying upwards of $500, $600 for bottles of spirits. Money is not the issue here. The value of this alcohol is not the issue. What we need to ensure is that we are, and our government are doing this, we are working on this right now to ensure that those that are chronically addicted to alcohol will have mandatory help to assist them through this process. We are working to get these systems right, to get these policy positions right. And the Minister for Health, he knows this better than anyone. His community of Tennant Creek has also been impacted immeasurably by alcohol, as has mine in Alice Springs. Madam Speaker, we had the former Attorney-General reportedly had shares in a wholesale company that supplies alcohol to bottle shops. Again, one of many stories that came out of the former Labor government when all this debate was centring around alcohol policy. Crime as it related to property offences in my hometown of Alice Springs over the 8 years doubled. Property offences went from around 4,000 incidents a year and they peaked at 8,000 incidents a year as a direct result of failed alcohol policy by the previous Labor government. And I've spoken before and I'll say it again, my hometown of Alice Springs has struggled to regain and rebuild its reputation since these incidences. I would not be standing here today, Madam Speaker, supporting a bill that I thought was going to affect my community again like it was previously. I simply would not do that. I support the Attorney-General with what she is trying to do with this bill. Changing of the alcohol floor price will not make one bit of difference, Madam Speaker. We have heard time and time again, and we have seen it. We have seen it with our own eyes, the impacts of what previous decisions have made in regards to this. Madam Speaker, I support the Liquor Legislation Amendment Bill, and I know that the Attorney-General, along with every member of this government, will work tirelessly to ensure that we have the policy settings right. I have seen what happens when the previous Labor government got it wrong. I have seen that with my own 2 eyes, and I never again want to relive that, Madam Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition spoke about cask wine sales, Madam Speaker. We can't even access cask wine in Alice Springs, for those that are unaware. What we saw as a result of floor prices is people moving on to hardened liquor, Madam Speaker, and this has been lived out through real experiences. I attend, like many members of this chamber, my Clean Up Australia days regularly and have for years. What we've seen over an extended period of time is people moving as a result of floor prices from alcohol like beer to hardened liquor, spirits. And I guess what we have seen as a result of that is more smashed glass, more impact on people, and in some cases, Madam Speaker, people reverting to hand sanitizer in Alice Springs. I think once again, this really does go to the whole argument that how can we say that a floor price is working at all if if people are just accessing other forms of alcohol through hand sanitizer or other means that are then leading to other health implications. This has been seen in my hometown of Alice Springs, and the local reptile park owner, Rex, has spoken to me many times. He has entire bins full of hand sanitizer that has been consumed, allegedly consumed, in our town, and it leads to serious health concerns. Madam Speaker, I lived through bad alcohol policy by the previous Labor government. I do not want to see that again, and what this government is ensuring we are doing through these amendments is not continuing with the bad history that the previous Labor government has. This will be a positive thing for our Northern Territory, Madam Speaker, and I support this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.